Tonight on Ukraine Today. Massive Russian strike. The occupiers hit energy infrastructure and civilian homes. There are casualties and serious damage. Battlefield situation. The enemy is moving troops to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Could this mean a new, large-scale Russian offensive? European Parliament against the Kremlin. Lawmakers adopted a resolution calling on allies to shut down Russian airspace violators. Azerbaijani plane shut down. War criminal Putin admitted Russia's role in the tragedy, but tried to shift the blame to Ukraine. All this and more coming up right now. Hi, I'm Volodymyr Robchun. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get to the news. Hundreds of Shahed drones and dozens of missiles. Russian terrorists massively attacked peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns. Kyiv and Kyiv region, Черкаси, Чернігів, Запоріжжя, Дніпропетровськ, Суми, Kharkiv, Donetsk, Poltava, Kherson, Odessa and Kirovograd regions were hit. In the capital, the left bank lost power, while the right bank had interruptions with electricity and water. The occupiers hit a residential high-rise. At least 12 people were injured. In the Kyiv region, homes and energy infrastructure were damaged. Repair crews are restoring electricity. In Kaniv, Cherkasy region, a residential building was damaged. The hydroelectric dam was closed. At least 10 people were injured. The Zaporizhzhia region was hit by drones, glide bombs and missiles. Private homes and civilian infrastructure were damaged. 21 residential buildings were hit. At least 7 people were injured and 2 killed, including a 7-year-old boy. Gas facilities were damaged. Access across the Dnipropetrovsk dam is limited. The Dnipropetrovsk region is also recovering from Russian attacks. Fires and power outages were reported. At least 1 person was injured. Some suburban trains are delayed. In the Sumy and Poltava regions, the enemy targeted energy infrastructure, causing power outages. Here's footage of a Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopter shooting down a Russian Shahed drone with machine gun fire. This was not last night, but during one of the attacks we face almost every night. I dare to say Ukraine will respond. We've already seen some Russian regions go dark and heard the president mention using long-range Ukrainian weapons in response to massive Russian attacks. I doubt this time it will be Moscow, but it's possible. Maybe it will make Russia stop the war. The security service of Ukraine struck Russian equipment and troop bases. Strike drone operators from the Special Operations Center attacked enemy targets on temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. FP2 drones with 105 kilograms warhead were used. Here's what President Zelensky said about forcing the terrorist state, Russia, to peace.
It's absolutely fair that Ukraine strikes back, with precise targeted hits. And unlike Russia, we know exactly what we want to achieve. Peace, of course. We are not fighting for the sake of war itself, as Russia does. Even Hamas is showing readiness for dialogue, but not Putin, not yet. Together, with our partners, we're creating the conditions to force Russia into peace, and it will happen. We support all global diplomatic efforts for peace in the Middle East, and truly hope that fair pressure on Russia will bring peace both to Ukraine and to our entire region.
Meanwhile, the occupiers damaged part of the Tolyatti-Odessa ammonia pipeline in Donetsk. Experts say there is no threat to people's lives. Transportation through this section has been stopped since 2014. The white smoke you see may indicate residual ammonia leakage. In the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,120 occupiers dead and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's 1,120,510 invaders. In the last day alone, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 5 Russian tanks, 14 armored vehicles, 13 artillery units and dozens more pieces of enemy equipment. The enemy is moving troops to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Could the Russian army launch a new, large-scale offensive just before winter? More on this in the report.
The Lukoil Korobkovsky gas processing plant in the city of Kotovo, Russia, has gone out of commission and perhaps has followed the fate of the Russian warship. This conclusion can be drawn from video footage of a drone attack on this facility in the Volgograd region. Russia continues to redeploy troops from the southern part of Pokrovsk. This was reported by the OSINT Analytic Unit Observer on social network X. The redeployment of troops from Pokrovsk towards Novopavlovka can be classified as a rotation of the occupiers due to heavy personnel losses in the Pokrovsk direction.
The plans of the Russian occupiers in the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region are to create a wide so-called buffer zone with an advanced depth of up to 20 kilometers. It should be noted that these are purely political objectives, not military ones. Thus, the Russian Federation plans to exert military political pressure on both Ukraine and the United States by expanding the theater of military operations at the expense of Ukrainian territories not included in the occupier's country, according to the decree of the Russian dictator, specifically at the expense of the Dnipropetrovsk region.
This refers to the creation of a precedent for so-called territorial exchanges, which previously failed in the plans of the Russian dictator when attempting to establish a buffer zone in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. It is not only on the front lines. The public spat between Trump and Putin is gaining momentum on the political stage. The subject of this has turned out to be the possible supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine.
This is an element of military political pressure from the United States on the Russian Federation. The goal is to force the Russian Federation to come to the negotiating table, and specifically on the terms of the United States, not those of the Russian Federation.
The head of Ukraine's mission to NATO, Alina Hetmanchuk, noted that an important aspect of the possible supply of Tomahawks to Ukraine is to make it clear to the Russians that anything is possible, that all options are on the table.
The United States is well aware that the number of oil refineries on the territory of the Russian Federation is quite limited. In addition to these developments, thanks to the impactful strikes by Ukrainian drones, approximately 38% of Russia's crucial oil refineries have already either partially or completely halted their production cycle, leading to significant disruptions.
NATO countries are considering options for a more decisive response to the increase in provocations from Russia against alliance members, not ruling out the possibility of a military response. This was reported by the Financial Times. One option being considered is the deployment of strike drones along the border with Russia and the easing of restrictions for pilots to allow them to open fire on Russian aircraft. Russia is calling on the United States to act responsibly regarding the supply of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And, as is customary for Russians, they threaten consequences for a possible delivery in order to save face in a losing situation for their domestic audience, that is, for the Russians themselves, who trust the Kremlin regime less and less with each passing year.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is a good time to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Also, please share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Since the start of the Dnipropetrovsk operation, Ukraine's defense forces have liberated 180 square kilometers of Donetsk region. Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces General Alexander Syrsky reports that counter-sabotage operations continue there to locate and destroy small enemy groups. Ukraine and Russia will soon sit at the negotiation table. US President Donald Trump said this during a meeting with Finnish President Alexander Stubb at the White House.
I made 7 deals. This would be number 8. The one I thought that I was going to make, and I think we will probably, is because it's a ridiculous war, it's a horrible war, the worst since World War II. If you look at the people dying, is Russia, Ukraine, I think we'll do that too. We've a lot of reasons for them to do it, and I think they'll be coming to the table pretty soon.
A Finnish journalist asked Trump whether he would defend Finland if Russia attacked. The American president said this.
I would, yes, I would. They're a member of NATO. I would, they're great people, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he's going to do that. I think the chances of that are very, very small. But it's very interesting because you have military to your size. You have a very powerful military, one of the best. And but certainly we will be there to help.
The European Parliament demands a unified EU response to Russian hostile actions. Lawmakers adopted a resolution calling Russia's airspace violations over the EU and NATO part of systematic military and hybrid warfare. The European Parliament urged allies to shut down Russian violators and tighten sanctions on Russia and its partners like Belarus, Iran and North Korea to weaken the ability to continue the war against Ukraine. War criminal Putin admitted Russia's role in the Azerbaijani plane tragedy during a meeting with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. According to the Russian dictator, that day Russia's air defense missiles, supposedly aimed at a Ukrainian drone, didn't hit the plane directly but exploded several meters away. Putin also said he only received updated information on the incident a few days ago. He lied, looking Aliyev in the eye. Putin invented the story about a Ukrainian drone in Russian airspace to make the latest war crime seem accidental. The claim that Russian air defense missiles exploded near the plane rather than hitting it was meant to suggest it wasn't intentional, but most air defense missiles work exactly like that. They explode near the target, destroying it with shrapnel. The fact that Putin just received updated information shows how long the Kremlin struggles to apologize without admitting responsibility. Aliyev and Putin met in Tajikistan. This country, a Rome Statute signatory, should have arrested the Russian dictator, who is internationally wanted. But it didn't happen. Why and what consequences will this have? Answers in the report.
The Russian dictator has flown to Tajikistan for the first time since 2022. And instead of being arrested, Putin was greeted by an honor guard. The streets are decorated with flowers and an entire paradise garden of fruit. The country, which is a member of the International Criminal Court, ignored the active warrant for the dictator's arrest, giving him the opportunity not only to attend international summits, but also to strengthen his influence in Central Asia.
This is to be expected. It's not the first time such a situation has occurred when Putin travels to different countries and, in general, no one is planning to arrest him.
Even before the visit, Human Rights Watch called on the Tajik authorities either to deny Putin entry or to detain him upon arrival. The human rights organization also appealed to the member states of the ICC, OSCE and the European Union, urging them to put pressure on Dushanbe to ensure it fulfills its international obligations.
Putin should stand trial in The Hague, not attend international summits in ICC member countries, said Liz Evanson, Director of International Justice.
However, despite all the demands, the Tajik authorities ignored the appeals of human rights activists and welcomed the Russian murderer with full honors. At the airport, he was greeted by President Emomali Rahmon. The streets of Dushanbe were decorated in the colors of the Russian flag, and large screens displaying images of both presidents were set up in the central squares.
And the majority of European and global organizations have shown themselves to be completely impotent during these 4 years of full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Neither the UN nor UNESCO nor all these organizations like the IAEA, all these tribunals and courts, they have shown that they have absolutely no influence on anything, that they are not ready to enter into conflict with Russia. And as we can see, neither are our partners. European partners are also not particularly willing to engage in serious major confrontations with Russia. Our diplomats also need to change their tactics and strategy and stop relying on the Hague Court. They should think about how to influence these processes going forward.
Putin arrived in the capital of Tajikistan on October 8th. 2 summits were scheduled to take place there at once: a meeting of the leaders of the Commonwealth of Independent States and a summit in the Central Asia-Russia format. Experts consider the second event to be the key one. Against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, sanctions pressure and growing international isolation, the Kremlin is seeking support in the region. The leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan also took part in the negotiations.
They traditionally make a significant contribution to maintaining peace and stability in the Central Asian region. At the same time, we are actively cooperating with our Tajik colleagues, developing defense, military technical, anti-terrorism and anti-narcotics cooperation, a guarantor of security in Tajikistan and throughout the region. This includes the 201st Russian military base stationed in the Republic.
The Kremlin brought along an impressive delegation. These include representatives from law enforcement, economic agencies, as well as the humanitarian sector. After all, the agenda includes the situation of labor migrants from Central Asia whose rights in Russia have been seriously curtailed since 2022. Foreigners are being forced to go to the front, and after a series of incidents, anti-migrant raids against them have intensified.
Xenophobic sentiments are actively fueled by pro-Kremlin propaganda. The children of thousands of migrants have been denied admission to Russian schools. Politicians in Moscow are proposing to ban migrant workers from bringing their families with them. Nargis Kamrabayeva, a journalist from Tajikistan.
Today, Central Asia is not just an ally of Moscow. The region has become an important transit corridor for circumventing sanctions, but at the same time, it is also an arena of diplomatic competition. Now more than ever, the Russian dictator is afraid of losing control. After all, China is actively strengthening its position, offering the countries of the region economic and infrastructure projects that provide an alternative to Russian influence.
Putin is not just afraid. He fully understands that he is gradually and steadily losing his significant influence over the territories of the Central Asian countries.
After all, in Central Asia, Putin has always felt almost like the main master.
Despite the strengthening positions of China and later Turkey, because China largely controls Kazakhstan, and at the same time, so does England. If we talk about Uzbekistan, Turkey and China have strengthened their positions there. But Putin has not given up on his dreams of maintaining Russia's position there. That is why all sorts of forums and meetings at the level of heads of state are being held in order to somehow demonstrate his significance. It should be understood that against the backdrop of the protracted war in Ukraine, Putin's position has not been seriously undermined. And in this situation, he is looking for ways to maintain his position, to somehow strengthen it specifically among the Central Asian countries.
But times are changing, and now even such close allies are putting the Kremlin in its place, setting new rules of the game. Central Asia is gradually establishing its own priorities, in which Russia is rapidly losing control with each passing day.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Asia is gradually turning away from Russia. Eastern countries no longer rely on this dubious partner. Here are the details.
A visit of last hope. That's exactly how global media have dubbed Putin's trip to Tajikistan. After all, former allies, or more accurately, former vassals, are simply turning their backs on Russia.
In fact, Russia doesn't really have any significant tools to put serious pressure on its Central Asian partners, who are supposedly its allies in the CSTO, the Customs Union, the SCO, and elsewhere. But there doesn't seem to be much willingness to cooperate on their part.
In fact, Bloomberg analysts report that the Kremlin's longtime allies in Central Asia and the Caucasus are building ties with China, the European Union, Turkey and the Persian Gulf countries, seeking to protect themselves from further aggression by Moscow. The reason for all this is the attack on Ukraine. Because Putin has essentially declared that he is ready to use force to reclaim any territory that was once under Soviet influence. But such conclusions by Western media are far from unfounded. Among the former allies, Azerbaijan is now clearly leading the way in terms of its behavior toward Moscow, refusing to attend Putin's parade, seeking other security guarantors, and most importantly, searching for new international trade markets. All of this reflects Baku's current position. And even Putin's admissions on the eve didn't help. He basically admitted that it was his air defense that shot down the Azerbaijani plane over Chechnya at the end of last year. It seems that even such statements can no longer save the relationship.
For the most part, for the very first time in the entire history of the post-Soviet space, we are now witnessing a country that is quite geographically close to Moscow, a nation that is fairly loyal and possesses a remarkably similar political regime, one that did not choose to take a distinctly different path, unlike Ukraine or Georgia, during the era of Saakashvili's leadership, acting in a manner that is not at all how things were traditionally done or expected to be done in the past. It publicly and openly criticizes Russia, and not only criticizes, but also firmly backs up its criticism with reciprocal actions. Actions that are quite similar to how Russia itself acts toward its own citizens and other sovereign countries.
and the desire to live independently is being voiced more and more openly from a Central Asian country. For example, just a few days ago, speaking at the UN, the leader of Kyrgyzstan stated that the country will now build its international relations without looking back at Moscow. I can
confidently say that today the process of forming a new Central Asia has begun, thanks to its unity, stability, and growing regional identity. It is taking an increasingly solid place in the system of international relations as an independent entity.
The United States is also adding fuel to the fire in Russian-Asian relations. For instance, Donald Trump announced his readiness to pull yet another territory, Uzbekistan, away from Russia's influence. The head of the White House announced agreements reached between major U.S. business representatives and the authorities of Uzbekistan. The companies will invest $1 billion in geological exploration and the development of critical mineral deposits in Uzbekistan. Trump also announced a major deal between Uzbekistan Airways and the American corporation Boeing. The agreement, which involves the delivery of 22 aircraft, is valued at $8 billion.
There are many areas in which Uzbekistan and the United States of America can expand mutually beneficial cooperation. I assure you, I personally guarantee the success of American companies operating in Uzbekistan. We will create all the necessary conditions so that American businesses feel confident and can fully take advantage of the opportunities in our market.
A sensational piece of news was published the day before by Reuters journalists. Turkey will be able to meet its gas needs and therefore is reducing imports from Russia and Iran. As a result, Russia is losing its largest client, one of the last in Europe. At the same time, Ankara plans to ensure its own supply by increasing production and boosting imports from the United States.
Of course, Turkey will, as always, act in its own way, sticking to its Eastern-style diplomacy. Bit by bit,
it eats the elephant just like the Celestial Empire. For example, China has stopped supplying Russia with high-precision equipment, which Russian manufacturers are now openly stating. In particular, the owner of the company Tatpromstan Ildar Nureyev, the head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Oleksiy Kovalenko, said that active negotiations are currently underway between Beijing and Washington on strategic rapprochement, which could ultimately have catastrophic consequences for Russia.
China at this moment is demonstrating a clear lack of urgency in its approach to supplying those very specific dual-use products and critical technologies to Russia, items which Russia very much desires and desperately needs for its ongoing operations and strategic objectives. These are essential semiconductors, critical components, specialized machine-building equipment, and large, sophisticated machines specifically used for the production of self-propelled artillery. These are specialized machines meticulously utilized for the comprehensive production of various types of ammunition, including cartridges and projectiles, as well as for manufacturing essential components specifically designed for gunpowder and high-grade explosives. Furthermore, they are employed in the creation of other critical goods, such as robust and protective plates intended for body armor, providing crucial defense for military personnel engaged in active duty and demanding operations. So,
China, now acting in its own interests, is putting obstacles in Putin's way when it comes to forming gas alliances between Russia and Central Asia. Since the beginning of this year, Gazprom's attempts to build domestic gas networks in these countries have been mysteriously failing, and analysts explain this is by no means without Beijing's involvement.
China has shown its lack of interest, made it clear, and somehow all these projects suddenly started to stall. And they are now facing certain contradictions, both economic and some technological and logistical reasons as well. Sometimes the roads aren't being built properly, sometimes the standards aren't being met, sometimes something else goes wrong, or the political will in the Central Asian countries has shifted a bit. These countries have started saying that they can supply oil and gas to China on their own, without intermediaries or help from Russia, and they don't need Russian volumes to secure their own shares in the Chinese gas market.
At the same time, to the average person, it might seem like there's no break in relations happening at all. The leaders of Central Asian countries periodically meet with Putin, and if you listen to Russian propaganda, it sounds like cooperation is only growing stronger. According to analysts, the main reason for this behavior remains the issue of migrants.
a very significant factor that forces Central Asia to take Russia into account and to be more conciliatory, even in the current situation. This is the fact that millions of labor migrants are working in Russia. This significantly eases social tensions in the region because if this generation, millions of people, were to return, for example, 2 million from Uzbekistan, 1 million from Kyrgyzstan, and so on, if they were to come back to their countries, those countries would not be able to provide them with decent jobs and wages. This means that social discontent could arise within the country.
However, as soon as new ties with the West strengthen and gain momentum, the migrants themselves will start returning to their homeland. After all, the nature of deals with Western partners is not about kickbacks and percentages, but about legitimate enrichment at the state level, not just for individual officials. And the choice of whether to live in a sanctioned Russia or in their own country with prospects will no longer be an issue.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.